Hey, what's up, everybody? Pete Caliendo, Baseball Outside the Box. Thanks again in the U.S. and around the world for joining us. Can't thank you. I know we got a lot of regulars, but we got new ones also, and want to thank you for joining us. It's going to be another great show, and if you missed today's show, boy, you're going to regret it, but you can always check it on YouTube. We're going to have it on YouTube at Peter Caliendo, but I say regret it live because this is one of the best guys. I got a chance to meet him a long time ago. Just outstanding coach, the minor league outfield and base running coordinator for the Boston Red Sox. And also a well-known speaker, spoke twice at the ABCA. He writes articles for USA Baseball, writes articles for the Inside Pitch. If you don't get that from the ABCA, he's got an article in here every time, and they are outstanding. Check them out. He's got a ton of followers on Twitter. He's a baseball coach's coach, in my opinion. What I love about him is he loves helping coaches, helping players, and develop the sport. So we're going to get started right away without wasting any time. Let's welcome Darren Fenster. What's up, Darren? How you doing, buddy?
Pete, doing well, man. Wish, like I mentioned before, I wish we didn't have the time to do this, but this is the reality of the baseball world right now. And even though we don't have anything going on the field, this is, something that we could do to continue to kind of push forward.
Absolutely. And you're a baseball guy. First, I just want to ask you, why do you do what you do? You've been doing it for a while now, and you've helped a lot of people, not just in the U.S., but around the world. You get all kinds of requests. Why do you do what you do?
It all stems from just the love of the game. I'm 41 years old, and, I fell in love with this game in my backyard growing up with my dad, my brothers, my friends. And, I've just been very fortunate to have been around a lot of really good people that have helped that love grow. And, I can honestly say that, now doing what I'm doing, having coached for, I guess this is my 14th year, my love with, the game just continues to grow. And in the same way that so many have put their love in the game, into me, I feel like that's something that I take a very serious responsibility for to really share my love and passion and knowledge of the game into the next generation of players and, and coaches as well.
The other thing is, I'm sure with all these people that follow you, you get a lot of requests, you get a lot of questions. I'm sure number one question from coaches and players is, during this down period, it's been 2 months now for a lot of people. Some haven't even gone outside because they can't, in a cold weather area. What do you tell everybody what to do, how to stay motivated? You got kids that are younger too. How do they stay motivated working out indoors and getting prepared for going out and playing baseball one day?
It's tough, but this is probably one of the only times where honestly you could say that little leaguers are doing the same exact thing as major leaguers. Things are starting to slowly open up and restrictions are getting lifted, but there was a solid 2-month stretch where nobody was really allowed to do anything. And whether it be a minor leaguer, whether it be a high school player or a college player, this is where self-motivation and, self-drive really kind of come into play, where you might have a major league star who has built a batting cage in the gym in his own house. But you might also have a kid who, is a high school player who, doesn't have access to anything. And so whether it be, finding a wall and a ball, that's something that I've been a huge proponent on. And, it's a way that you could kind of continue to, keep sharp or just find different ways to get better, or even just watching some of the classic games that are on television, and watching games in a way to learn. Yes, you're a fan, but you definitely have a different perspective when you're deeply involved in the game. That is a little bit different when you're out playing shortstop and you're involved in that specific part of the game. When you get to look at it from a 30,000 foot view, I think it allows guys to understand the game a little bit better. And then when you do get back onto the field, it's just going to make you that much more prepared to even further yourself as a player, and then even, collectively as teams.
You mentioned wall ball. It's interesting, and we're going to get to some questions, but you mentioned wall ball. What's interesting about it is, you're kind of, and I don't want to speak for you, but it seems like you're kind of, and I forget old school, but some old ways of doing things, I guess, like you said, the basic stuff, the kids doing in Dominican and Cuba, but also using technology. You believe in both of them. You mix it in, the new stuff now and the old stuff that we used to do.
Yeah, there's just like anything else in life, it's all about balance. My biggest coaching influence was a guy by the name of Fred Hill, who was a guy, he was an ABCA Hall of Famer. I played for him at Rutgers and then coached under him. He was in his 60s when I played for him, and he was in his 70s when I coached with him. Foundationally, like, he was as old school as it got. There was a reason why his programs were successful, and they were, fundamentally based, and, things that very much still apply today. But when it comes to the individual development, the technology, and there are so many different ways that allow us to analyze the way our players develop, and the things that, emphasize strengths, that highlight weaknesses. It allows us to just streamline some things a little bit better. But that doesn't go to say that things that worked 10, 15, 20 years ago don't still work today. And, I say this to people all the time, where, we're in a stage of the game where I think a lot of, some of those quote unquote old school guys who might not be privy to the technology, or they may not know the lingo, they may feel like the game is passing them by. But at the end of the day, if something works, it works. It doesn't matter if, it was done with, a Rapsodo or a Hit Tracks machine, or if it's something that was done with zero tech at all. If you're making your players better, if you're making your teams better, I think at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And if you can use, and if you need, the new age stuff to do that, then that's fine. As long as you could figure out a way to, to get through to your players. You don't want to ever lose sight of what the big picture is, and that, in coaching, it is always about your players, and it's always about your teams.
And I love what you got on your Twitter. It says, behind every great athlete are those who taught them how to play the game. And a fan of yours, Dinesh from Nepal, actually, the country of Nepal, he had a question. I think it'd be a great place to start. The philosophy, your philosophy of coaching in general, and the relationship to the education of it.
You could go into so many different realms of it. And, I have different stages of my own career as a player and career as a coach, where, I'll circle back to just, a love for the game. And, when I look back at some of the best players that I've ever coached, and some of the best coaches that I've ever been around, that's always been a constant. Because when there's that, that love for all things on the diamond, what happens is, when it comes to players, they want to be on the field. And, you've created some kind of an environment where, they're looking forward to being out there. And that means drill work becomes, there's better energy in the drill work. There's more focus. And if that's what every single day is like, well, then that player can't help but get better. On the coaching side of that, if, you have coaches who like truly can't get enough of the game, well, there's going to be constant conversation amongst staff members on all things, whether it be specific to your team or, I can't tell you how many times I walked into the office at Rutgers, one morning, and I would spend an hour talking with Coach Hill about a playoff game that was on TV the night before. And we were just constantly talking shop. And in the process of doing that, sometimes your beliefs are challenged. Sometimes your mind is opened up to a different point of view. And healthy debate only continues to help you push yourself forward as a coach. And in the process of, continuing to grow as a coach, you are helping your players grow. And, I'm a true believer that, that love is the foundation of everything that we're going to be able to do on the field.
Yeah, and I hear you talk a lot about that. We don't watch enough games. The kids don't watch enough games. They don't study. I was thinking this during this dead period as coaches. I mentioned this about a couple months ago. I said, wouldn't it be great to get on Zoom and with the kids, watch a real game, a tape game, obviously, and kind of ask questions to them as the game goes on.
Right. Now I hate saying, back in the day and when I played, I don't think that just because it's a different time. And, we didn't have access to the internet. We didn't have access to cell phones and, all the, like, there's so many other things that players and coaches have access to in 2020 then they did 20 years ago, then they did 30 years ago. So, I know for a fact that my own development as a player came from watching so much baseball. I remember seeing guys do something in a major league game, and I would try it, in my own games. I remember announcers talking about how Cal Ripken had no range, but he was able to position himself hitter to hitter, where he played on shortstop, so he didn't get exploited with that range. And I remembered that very next day, I started moving around, not knowing where the hell I was going, but because I had heard that on TV, it was something that I had tried for myself. So, fast forward to, present day, we have our instructional league program in, September and October with the Red Sox. And fortunately for, more years than not, we've been in the playoffs in the big leagues during instructional league. So after a game, we would grab the whole team together and we'd be like, all right, guys, hey, did you see David Ortiz's at bat last night? Did you see the play that Jackie Bradley made? Did you see what Mookie did? And guys just stare at us. And then we ask the question, hey, did anybody actually watch the game? And out of 20 players, 3 guys might raise their hand. So that's something that I think guys love to play. They love to work, but they just weren't raised in a time in their lives where they love to also watch the game. And we're just trying to expose that side of it as just a piece of a way that they can get better. And now's as good of a time as any with so many of those classic games on. And even for myself as a coach, I live in New Jersey and I catch myself watching some of the classic Yankee and Met games, and I'll fall into a rabbit hole where 6 hours of my day just went by because I watched the 1986 NLCS, which was just an incredible series.
Absolutely. What about coaches? What do you guys do after a ball game? You review things, you talk about stuff. How does that work as your coaching staff?
Everybody's different with how they handle that. So, for example, at Rutgers with Coach Hill, after every practice, we would have a debrief on the practice and then a plan for the next day. After every game, as soon as we'd get back to the hotel or we get back to the locker room for a home game, again, same thing. We would talk about that day's game and then prepare for tomorrow. With my own teams, and this is just something that's a personal preference for me, when I was managing my own clubs, when the game was over, it was done. We have long days at the ballpark where for a 7:00 game, players are showing up between 12 and 1. Coaches are showing up between 11 and 12. So by the time the game ends between 10 and 11 at night, everybody's spent from a long day. So we choose to start our following day with the review where something could be fresh on their mind with a little bit of a better way to stick. We could take our teaching points from that day where, guys can actually, at the start of their day where their attention's at the best, they're able to take that stuff in a little bit better. And sometimes, if it might just be one of those days where the next day is the best time to do it, good or bad, because, you might be sky high after a great win, after your team plays poorly, you might want to blow up the whole system. And sometimes you need to take a step away and, regroup, and then, as cooler heads prevail, then kind of move forward.
You mentioned Cal Ripken and watching them, and it was interesting because I had a question here from Polly Major. Cool name. Polly Major. We're talking about the first step as far as quickness. What are some drills or some things that you may teach, you saw, that Ripken's doing or other players are doing that you learned from, in teaching that?
So the first step on a defensive player when it comes to both infield and outfield is what we call our pre-pitch. Some people might call it prep steps. Some people might call it the ready position, whatever it is. We're all talking about the same thing. And the whole idea is to be on the balls of your feet for as short a period of time as you possibly can. So a drill that we have, if guys go to my Twitter page or if you just search like Turbo Pepper, that's a drill that I think I have a video of that on my feed where we are specifically focusing on the players getting to the balls of their feet and the feeling of getting off the balls of their feet. We're trying to develop that quick twitch, that first step quickness. And then as we kind of develop the technique of it, then we really try to perfect our timing of it, where this is something where we would actually rather players be a split second late than a split second early, because when they're early, then they touch down and they're flat footed and then they stop. And then when you stop, you have to start up again, which is slow. If you're a split second late, say you're coming down or you're getting to the balls of your feet as the ball is being hit, you are in motion the whole time and you stay in motion, and that's a much quicker position to be. So these are things that we practice, and you don't get consistent with them unless you spend a lot of time with them and a lot of time talking about them to your players. And, for some, they pick it up after a week or two, and for others, it takes a little bit longer, but the message is consistent from our end, and we will explain why that's so important. A guy dives for a ball and it tips off their glove, and everybody just sees that last part of the play. What a lot of players and coaches really don't look at is the start of the play. Like if they were late getting off the blocks, there's your difference. So that's how we kind of explain to them and show them exactly why that's so important.
And when you're talking about that, do you find that it's an individual thing? Do it like everybody has a different system, whether it be they're moving their feet, whether they jump into it, whether they hop? You see different. You let the players allow them to use their own system if it's working?
It's an individual thing. It's very similar to like a swing. There are checkpoints that every good swing has, and if you took a camera, every single good swing would look identical. But how they get to that point, it's all unique. So for us, the whole focus is getting to the balls of their feet and having the timing to it. So just to give you a couple examples, like, Dustin Pedroia, you could Google Dustin Pedroia pre-pitch and you'll see him jump 3 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
And that was a product of, he was a tennis player as a kid, and that's how he got his pre-pitch. A guy like Xander Bogaerts, he might just walk into it. Some guys have a little hop. Some guys, I remember watching Jimmy Rollins when he was playing shortstop for the Phillies. He wouldn't move. And, unless you knew what you were looking for, it'd be like, man, this guy doesn't do anything. But then at a closer look, he basically starts on his heels and just rolls to the balls of his feet. So he was putting himself in a really good position. So it was just it's a very individualized thing. But if you have those two constants, those two necessary things, then we're in good shape.
Now, I was pretty slow. So what I remember back in my days, I had to worry about, I was always thinking the location of the pitch, the angle of the bat. I had to get a jump ahead of everybody else. And also, if you could talk about that, and also where to, how do you do it in practice? Because you can't, the game's not enough. You got to obviously practice it.
Yeah. Just like anything else, if you want to be good at something, you got to work on it. So what you're talking about is just the anticipation side of defensive play and, reading swings. So, you might have, if you know your catcher signs, and if you're that type of a player and you're looking in and when there's a fastball away versus an off-speed pitch, you might not necessarily move 3 steps before the pitch is even thrown, but you might angle your pre-pitch to get thinking that the guy was going to hit the ball the other way if you're the shortstop, or hit the ball up the middle. So you kind of cheat that way. If it's an off-speed pitch, maybe you read the swing a little bit early and you kind of cheat to your right. But for infielders, for outfielders, when batting practice is going on, there's no better defensive rep than working live during batting practice. When you can perfect your pre-pitch timing, you're really getting a great view, a game view of balls coming off the bat. Outfielders can work on their reads and their breaks and their routes and all those sorts of things. So the anticipation side that you're talking about is something that, hey, if you screw it up in BP, no big deal. But hey, you might learn how to read things really, really well in batting practice that allow you to take those into the game. And that's the whole idea.
Love it. I want to jump to communication a little bit. It seems that, talk about how you communicate to players nowadays. It seems to be changing a little bit. I think we could learn a lot from that.
Yeah. I distinctly remember starting my coaching career, working with Coach Hill. And there were two distinct things that, I remember in the coaching sense of, number one, I tried to be Fred Hill Jr. which, I say that in the most complimentary of ways, like me being an extension of him, where my belief system, even like the things I said, the way I said them, that was really all I knew as a coach. So, I wasn't finding my own way, so to speak, as a coach. And then the other thing was I approached things from a player's perspective, in the sense that if something worked well for me, then I thought that it was going to work well for everybody. I had no sense of the individualization of coaching. I felt like I knew baseball well. I knew the game well. I knew game strategy well. I knew mechanics well, but I had no clue how to coach. And that's where early on, I really failed players, in the sense that, I was teaching, a 6'5" left-handed power hitter the same thing that worked for me as a 5'9" opposite field slap hitter in some cases. And so I did a disservice to that guy, but I didn't know any better. And I think in today's day and age, with so much more information out there, I think there's a better way to find balance, like where, nothing will ever replace experience. And that's something that it's a tough to see a lot of the direction that the game is going in, because there's so much value when it comes to coaching, to know how hard the game is, to know what it's like to stand in a batter's box, on a pitcher's mound, to be in a dugout, to know the ups and downs on the field, when it comes to having the field for when to approach someone. So as I didn't learn the individualization of coaching until I got with the Red Sox in my first year, where I was a hitting coach in A-ball. And when you're a hitting coach in professional baseball, you have to worry about 12 players. I didn't even know pitchers' names until May. Like that's how focused you are on these guys, and you spend so much time with them. You know their swings better than they do. You know their personalities. And that's where I learned, wow, like, I had 12 hitters and I had 12 different approaches. I knew the guys that I had to be firm with, and I knew the guys who I had to handle with kid gloves. We have Latin players, we have college players, we have high school players, so many different dynamics from the background perspective, and then the personality perspective, where our job as coaches is to figure out a way to get through to every single player. And the best way to do that is figuring out, the playing side, like watching a player play. That's the easy part. Figuring out what makes them tick is the hard part. But when you're able to combine those two things, you're really able to make a lot of inroads with them as players, and, after the game as people.
I was reading, because you had on your Facebook, I thought it was interesting. It says, hate the coach who works you too hard, always on your ass. And that's a question. Wait till you play for the coach who doesn't care. Where's that fine line of, being tough on a player and then backing off?
It's it's a coach to coach thing. I played for guys who were incredibly demanding, who probably, hindsight 2020, probably demanded too much out of me. And that's like, a bitty basketball coach from when I was 10 years old. It was like no environment I could have ever experienced before in my life. Like even as an adult, like, these guys, these two coaches for this bitty basketball team with 8-foot baskets, they would be fired or arrested or both just for the way. That's what it was like in the 80s.
Yes.
And and now I hated it as a kid at that time, but I'm able to look back at that now and realize like what that did for me. It wasn't fun going through it, but man, did that toughen me up. And I have a specific story from when like that really transformed me when I was a freshman at Rutgers. I was a starting shortstop, and Coach Hill expected the shortstop and the second baseman to relay off-speed pitches to the third baseman. And we had gotten our asses kicked by Central Florida, where they must have had 7 or 8 left field line doubles. And after the game, Coach Hill brought the position players together, and he started by saying, "Hey, Darren, did you tell the third baseman when the off-speed pitches were coming?" And I said, "No." And he just undressed me in front of the entire team. And so this is 7 games into my college career. I was embarrassed. I was literally in tears. ready to transfer. Like I was like, he hates me. He just blamed the loss on me. We get back to the hotel and he grabs me and he says, "Hey, come to my room for a second." I'm wiping my eyes. And he said, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but the reason why I'm on you so hard on all these little things is because I think you have a chance to be a great player for us. So don't get worried when I'm correcting you or I'm pointing all these things out, and listen to what I'm saying. You should be worried if I stop all of that, because if I stop, that's when I've given up on you and I've moved on to somebody else." And in that moment, it completely transformed me in the sense of how I was able to handle criticism and not necessarily listen to the volume of the criticism, but to really lock in on the words.
I'm looking here. Jamie asks, have you noticed a big difference in how players are coached when you played versus how they're coached now? I guess similar to what you were talking about, but a big difference?
Yeah, I think the difference now is coaches just have to explain why. Players are very intellectual now with all the information that's out there. I mean, God forbid any of the players are scrolling through, hitting Twitter, which is just a cesspool of, a bunch of jerks. But in that is like, some good nuggets that might be able to help some guys. And there's that sort of information for every single part of the game. 15, 20 years ago, a coach could say jump and the entire team would jump because that's what the respect that a coach had gotten at that at that time in life. Now you just have to explain why you're doing what you're doing and showing them exactly how that's going to make them a better player, explaining why doing X, Y, and Z is going to make you a better team. And I think, once you get over that, then I think, at the end of the day, it all kind of filters into the same box.
And you deal with, obviously in the pro level, but you deal with a lot of coaches at the high school and youth level, travel teams, advising them. What things seem to be changing a little bit. What's your advice for coaches and how to deal with parents? Because, the old school way doesn't seem to work that well anymore.
Yeah. You know what? Like, I'm very fortunate that in professional baseball, we don't have to deal with parents.
Right.
Sometimes agents come into play, but agents deal with the farm director and not the on-field staff, which is great. But I think you have to set the expectations and the standards like from day one. So, for example, coaching for 6 years in college, you're building a relationship with a kid from the moment you start recruiting them. And, then you start to get to know the family. And I think if you are upfront about how you're going to handle situations and what your approach is, that like if there is any kind of a situation that comes up where a parent feels like they need to get involved, you can say, hey, like whatever. Now some people may deal with parents. Some people don't. Be like, oh, if you're a coach who says, hey, like I'm not going to deal with parents when it comes to playing time or whatever, you could fall back and say, hey, we talked about this on day one. If your son has an issue with how he's being used, he has every opportunity to talk to me and we'll talk about it. But I'm going to talk about it with him as opposed to talking about it with you. Excuse me. But like that all falls back into what coaches are willing to deal with. And I think you just have to cover your own bases by setting whatever those standards are from the get-go, and you can't kind of manipulate them as things go around. You can't say, hey, my door's always open to parents and players, and then all of a sudden when you have to have a tough conversation, you shut the door. So, I think being consistent in what, and how you're planning on dealing with that and communicating that is a very important thing.
And I could see, obviously, being in pro ball that you don't have to worry about that, which kind of helps a lot. But there's a lot of young coaches out there that have to deal with those situations that are not easy sometimes. So I love what you said. Let's shift a little bit. Talk about the buzzword. The big buzzword is culture. Building the right culture for your club. What's your translation of that?
Culture. I have a funny saying on that. Like, if you're constantly talking about your culture to your team, that means your culture sucks, because culture is not words. It's not something that, you put up on a wall. It's not something that you print on a t-shirt. It's something that you live every single day. So, you set your standards, and then, you might talk about them on day one of your first, team meeting, just to make sure that they're clearly communicated. And then you are living your culture. You are the example. If you want your team to constantly be on time or be early, well, coaches, you can't show up late. You can't be. It can't be one of those things of, hey, do as I say, not as I do. So it's a culture is built from the integrity of its leaders, and there's everybody, and this doesn't just go to culture, but in this day and age, everybody knows the buzzwords. Everybody knows becoming the best version of yourself, or playing for something bigger than yourself, and team before me, all this stuff, the stuff that you see everywhere. But that is just a saying. It's just words. So how you define those things and what those things look like, that's how, in my opinion, you build your culture, where, for example, everybody said, hey, we got to be able to do the little things. Well, you say it over and over and over again, but you never point out what a little thing is.
What are they? Yeah.
So one thing that I've always had the habit of doing, and I don't know when I started this, but when we would do our game review the following day, I would always love to use the game as the teacher, where they have specific examples that they can look at. And, you say, hey guys, what was the play of the game? So say we won the game on a walk-off single. Guy scores from second base. And they say, what was the play of the game? And everybody says, well, no, the guy who hit the walk-off single. That was the game-winning play. But we actually had two plays of the game. The first one was the 9-pitch at bat, where a guy drew a 2-out walk, and then he got a great read on a dirt ball that allowed him to go to second base. So these things that might not necessarily appear in the box score, or you don't get the headline for, without those things happening, the game-winning hit, the guy who gets the headline, he doesn't have the opportunity to do that. So I think, that's just an on-field example. But when you point out the behaviors that you want, that might not be noticed, without guys pointing them out, when that's a consistent thing, then all of a sudden, like, everybody wants to be recognized. Everybody, wants confirmation that they're doing the right thing. So then all of a sudden, well, Fenster never, says great job for the guy who hit the walk-off home run, but he's always like, well, when the left fielder made a great play to keep a double play in order, like, that's the stuff that matters to him. And I'm like, yeah, like when you really focus on a lot of the little things, and this is on the field, behavioral things off the field, when you point out those things, then they start to grow, because they understand that's what you're looking for.
Darren, it's interesting. Do you track that, like the base running part, the offensive part, pitching things, hitting things that they're doing well, that maybe, like you said, aren't the ones that everybody looks at all the time? One, do you track them? And two, what about the young kids that are on the bench? Sometimes we forget about them. And they don't feel like they're there in much of a team. They're not part of the team. Right.
So the first part of the question, we don't specifically track that kind of stuff, only because a lot of times, it's really subjective. Like, what is a game-winning play? Like, I'm watching the game in a certain way, and I point out something that happened in the third inning that scored a run, and we win by 1 run. So even though the magnifying glass wasn't on it, so it's, things like that, it's hard to differentiate.
Do you encourage coaches, as it's happening, to let your players know what's going on, that they've done something well?
Yeah, I mean, there's encouragement, yeah, but I think when it comes to piecing things together, once you have that game in the books, then you could show exactly how that specific play affected the end result, because everybody's about the result.
Yeah.
So like, you don't know where that's gonna land in when all is said and done. But Remind me, what was the second part of
The
that?
second one, what you got the bench guys,
Right.
you know, and what, you know, how to motivate them, keep them motivated, keep them interested into the game more.
Yeah. So that's a tough one. It's the hardest. It's probably the hardest part of coaching. You know, I spoke with Dan McDonald a month or two ago. He's a coach of Louisville, and he put it in a great perspective in the sense that he's got 35 guys on his roster.
Wow.
You probably have 15 or 16 guys that are getting everyday at bats, everyday innings, right? So you probably have 20 guys who aren't playing nearly as much as they want to. They're upset about that. And then of the 15 or 16 guys, probably 7 or 8 of them aren't playing as well as they think they can be playing. So on a 35-man roster, you have 27, 28 guys who are upset about something. And so that's an incredible dynamic to work through on a daily basis. And so when it comes to creating, you know, the enthusiasm, the buy-in for all 35 guys that those 8 guys have, it's incredibly hard. So I think the only way that you could do it is by spending time with those players who don't have the roles that they want, or they're not playing the way that they want to. Because that's truly the only way that you could show that you give a shit about those guys, by spending time with them. If, you know, they say, like, you don't really have to take care of, you know, the stars of your team, because just by them being in the lineup, that'll take care of itself. But, you know, one thing that Coach Hill did all the time was, in practice, he would spend far more time, you know, being actively involved in coaching the guys who are going to get redshirted and the backups than he would the guys who are the everyday players. And I think he did that. I never asked him why, but, you know, hindsight 2020, I distinctly remember this. But, you know, I think you're constantly feeding into the future of your program. So maybe you're talking to a freshman who's not playing, and you're constantly working with him, and you say, like, hey, like, you might not get your opportunities now, but, you know, I'm going to be with you every step of the way, because maybe later this year, maybe in 2 years, it's going to be your time, and I want you to be ready. Same thing goes for just leadership, where you might have an everyday, like, freshman player that you're saying, hey, watch what the seniors are doing right now in terms of how they're leading this team, because in 2 years, in 3 years, it's going to be your team. So I think, you know, this is nothing that you can fake when it comes to, you know, making those guys feel a part of the team, even when they don't have the roles that they want to. And the way that you're able to do that is by spending time with them. And then, you know, commending them, you know, even though they don't have the box score where you could say, hey, good game. You know what, something that I always enjoyed doing would be, if we had a great game out of our bullpen, one of the first guys that I would find after the game would be the bullpen catcher, say, hey, great job getting those guys ready. They were lights out. And so, you know, whether that guy thought I was full of shit or not, like, it's something that takes 5 seconds, and it makes that kid feel like they did something. Absolutely. Even though they weren't in the box score.
Yeah. And they are doing something. Somebody's got to catch them, right? And somebody's got to get them ready. So that's great stuff. I love it. You know, here's the other area, is motivation. I mean, whose responsibility is it? Is it the player's job to get motivated and get better, or is it the coach, or is it a combination of both?
It's a combo. You know, like I've always said that there are days that the players motivate us. You know, when you're in the dog days of summer, or, you know, it's freezing cold in Portland, Maine, and, you know, everything in between. You know, you have players that it's your responsibility to get them better. And, you know, when they show some enthusiasm for their craft, you know, it doesn't, you know, the energy that they give off feeds us in the very same way that the energy that we give off feeds them. So, you know, I think there are aspects of motivation that are internal, that guys, you know, I think there's a sense that you have to be self-motivated, and not just in baseball, but in life in general, in order to be successful. But, you know, different people have different ways of being pushed, whether it be, you know, self-motivation, having teammates motivate one another, or having, you know, coaches motivate them, or just a program, just being a part of a program might motivate you. You know, like if you are a part of the UConn women's basketball program, that comes with some legendary accomplishments, and the motivation is to, keep the bar as high as those before you have set it. So, I think motivation is found in a lot of different avenues.
You talked about doing the right things and what those things might be on the field. What about the things you need to do off the field that also keeps that consistency and becoming a better person, better player, and adding to the team?
Yeah. There's a saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. Again, it's just a saying. But
unless you do it, right?
Yeah. When I was a player with the Kansas City Royals, our field coordinator at the time, a guy by the name of Mike Jerschley, who's now the third base coach for the Royals, he had a saying, I forget what it was, but I just remember him saying, like, always and always, meaning, at all times in every way. And so that's something that's always stuck with me, in a sense that always and always, it's meaning like you're not just a baseball player when you're on the field. You're not just representing the Boston Red Sox or Rutgers University when you have that uniform on. When you're out at a party, if you're out at a bar, if you're whatever it is, like if something happens away from the field and you get in trouble, they're not going to say John Smith got in trouble. The headline's going to read Rutgers baseball player or Boston Red Sox player gets arrested. And so, rather than saying, stay out of trouble, it was always putting it in a different light of make yourself look good, make the organization look good, make the team look good. So it was more of a challenge of living up to a standard rather than a fear of like, hey, don't do this or don't do that. And when everybody's of that same mindset, meaning in everything that we do at all times, then, I think that sets a really good precedent for how guys are expected to handle their business.
Darren, we got about 15 more minutes, but I want to ask you, things that kind of piss you off, I guess, in players when you see them doing certain things. What upsets you when you see certain things that players do during games or in practice? I know it's a general question, but there are certain things that just get to you.
Well, no, I have two specific things that drive me nuts and make my blood boil, and I'll probably get all fired up talking about them.
That's all right. Good.
Number one is effort. When guys aren't giving the effort that is expected out of them, because effort is something that is a decision. Guys can control how hard they run down the line. Guys can control, their attention to the detail, the focus, all those things. Like when guys lack in that sort of thing, I kind of take that as they're making a decision to not do what they're supposed to be doing. And there are different stages of coaching, just like in everything else, where, hey man, like, the first time a guy doesn't run down the line, it may just be, hey, like, you got to give us a better effort than that. I know you can run harder. The second time it might be a little bit of a louder message. The third time a guy might get pulled out of the game. There's different phases where you give the kid every opportunity to go through the learning curve. You can't expect a guy to be perfect right away, and you got to be consistent with your messaging. So that's the first thing. And then the second one is when guys lack focus or they're not thinking, the mental errors of the game. And again, like, I think you handle a rookie, a freshman who isn't in their right backup position when a ball gets thrown away different than you might handle the junior who's been hearing and working on it for the last 3 years. Again, I think focus is something that you can control, and you shouldn't be standing out in the outfield pissed off about an at-bat you just had. I know, believe me, like it's not an easy thing at times. And
we've all been there.
Yeah. One thing as a coach, like I never want to forget how hard it is to physically play the game and how demanding the game is on the mental side of things. So, I think there's a leash in terms of, how far you let a situation go, but you have to hold every single player accountable. I think you hold players to the same standard, but the discipline for those players is completely different, meaning certain players earn length on their leash. So example I might give, so say you have a senior who has done every single thing above board for 4 years, and he shows up late one day, right? So the discipline for that kid might be walking up to him and be like, oh, man, hey, 4 years, you don't have to show up on time anymore, and that's it. It's like busting the kid's balls. That's his discipline, making him know that you're aware of it. Now, say you have a freshman who shows up just as late with that kid, you might kick him out of practice just because he hasn't earned the leash that upperclassman has by doing stuff above board for so long. And, especially when you have a newcomer on a team, like those first few days, weeks, that first year, that's where you're setting the foundation for what you want that kid to be as a part of your program. So I think, there's a benefit to being a little bit harder on those kids just to be able to impact them for the sake of what they're going to be down the road.
I'll tell you what, I love it. I told you this was going to be great, and it is. I practiced this. I'm going to try something here. I practiced it. Hopefully under pressure I won't break down. I'm going to share something that Coach Mike Pinto, one of the most successful coaches I've been around, independent league. He's the winningest coach in the Frontier League, but just a great person, follows you. He's a personal friend, and he's on listening. I think, can you see the screen right now?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, I think everybody else hopefully can see that also. The question here is, Mike follows you, and he noticed this, and he loved it, and he wanted to know where this came from. How did you kind of develop it? Was it with your team? Was it, after a practice? How did it talk about this?
Yeah, Mike's a good man. I had a chance to meet him, I think, at the ABCA convention, and I don't know where I first got this. Whether I read it somewhere or I heard someone talk about it, but it was the difference between team standards and team rules. And the light that I understood it was that team rules were a list of things that you cannot do. Hey, you can't do this, you can't do that. It was something that players were kind of ingrained to live in fear of. You live in fear of the team rules. The way that I looked at a team standard was the complete opposite of that, more of a challenge of stuff that they can do, the positive element of it, where my first year as a rookie ball manager in 2013, this started with 3 points. It was be early, be respectful, and be professional. And then I think, obviously once I got to Greenville, we added the fourth one there of be who you are and do what you do. And I actually added a fifth one where guys enjoyed it. It's be better than my bad. And each one of those, it's very much semantics with a similar impact that rules have. But these were things that guys can do every single day. And they really had nothing to do with baseball. And when guys did not live up to the standard, and you see I have it there where it says always and always. So if we expected you to be early for stretch, that meant you're all also expected to be early for treatment in the training room, for the bus, for your weight room, for your workouts in there. Always and always. Being respectful. I just thought of different things that come up over the course of a baseball season. So respectful of the game, meaning like, all right, you play the game the way it was meant to be played. Respecting your teammates, respecting your coaches, the opponent. We don't want to show people up. Like I hate bat flips, and I hate, pitchers who decide to dance when, they strike somebody out. I think, it doesn't set the right tone for what the game is supposed to be all about. Being professional is just how we go about our business, how we play the game. Staying not getting too high, not getting too low, those sorts of things. Then the be who you are and do what you do is just trying to make guys understand that every single one of us has a unique gift. I had the fortunate opportunity to coach Michael Kopech, who can throw a baseball 105 miles an hour, right? On that same team, I had a kid by the name of Jalen Beeks, who's now in the big leagues with the Rays, who had trouble breaking 90. So I didn't want Jalen trying to throw 105 miles an hour. I didn't want Michael Kopech to become a thumber, throwing in the low 80s like Jalen did, and he had some success. I wanted guys to understand not to compare to the guy next to him, but to use the gifts that they had. And these were things that guys could do every single day. And when they didn't, that's when we had to implement some discipline and hold guys accountable to the standard, because that's the only way a standard works, is if there's accountability to it when guys don't live up to it.
All right. And we will email that to everybody. So you have that also. So we'll make sure you get your Darren's information. I want to take a question here from Troy Blakely. At the high school level, those younger guys are on different teams. They play JV and freshman. He goes to every game. He's asking, do you suggest being in a dugout, communicating with those guys, or watching from the stands, the press box, then communicating later? So he must be the varsity coach.
Yeah. You know what? I would say, like, there are different ways that you could approach that. And just to give you an idea, in my role as our outfield and base running coordinator, I'll go to each affiliate once a month for 3 or 4 days. So I'm seeing, just basically a 1 series snippet of every affiliate each month. And I would say the majority of the time I am sitting in the dugout watching those games. But every once in a while, I'll go up into the stands in street clothes just because I want to see the game from that bird's eye view, because you could just see it a little bit differently. And it might open up your eyes to something that someone is doing or something that someone isn't doing. So maybe, mixing your views to give yourself different ways to look at the game, to open up different coaching points that you can make to your players. I think there's a huge benefit to that. But there's also an element of, so if you're talking about a varsity coach being involved with his freshman and JV teams, it's a similar type role where it's not my team,
right?
But I'm responsible for what's going on the field, and in a once removed sort of way. So, it's far more watching than it is being actively involved with the data, with what's exactly going on in that game. So, in instances that you might address as a manager or a hitting coach on that staff, as a coordinator or as a varsity coach, you just might write a note about it and then follow up with it later, because you never want to tell a player something different than what they're hearing with the coaches that they're working with every single day. And you want to get everything on the same page. So, I think it's as important, if not more important, for that varsity coach to pour into the freshman coach and the JV coach, because those are the guys that are with those players every single day. Those are the guys that are shaping the future of your program. And so, like, in our role as coordinators, and we probably have about 10 of them, we probably spend as much time, if not more, working with our affiliate coaches than we do the actual players, because those are the guys who are going to have the greatest impact on the players' careers.
And I love that you keep bringing up coaches also, because I think we're very similar in this way. I've always been a big believer, if we're going to develop the sport, if we're going to grow the sport, keep kids in the game more, we've got to have good coaches at the young levels. And there's a lot of young coaches that are trying to get better and better. And I think the more we could guide them and, and getting better, the game just grows more. And I really believe that you do that a lot for the coaches in the U.S. So speaking to the coaches, the young people, what would you like to see them do differently or better to help young kids develop better in the game and stay in the game longer?
For young coaches, I think the biggest thing is ego. And I was no different. Like, when I think when I say ego, I joined the coaching ranks in 2006 for a guy who had won over 1,000 games and was in a Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And I dove in head first, thinking that I was going to have, this huge impact on our program greater than what he had. And, like, my heart was in the right place. I wanted to help every player. I wanted to help the program, but I was so naive in the sense of everything that went into coaching players. I had no idea how to coach. So my ego got in the way of thinking that, hey, everything that worked for me or my belief system was the only way. And, you know, I think when these young coaches who have more information about the skills of the game get into the game, they, you know, I think they're in a similar way that I did. They want to just dive in and fix everything right away.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that they can because they have all this knowledge. And even though I'm sure there's a handbook on coaching, but the real handbook is experience,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I think hindsight 2020, I would have done far more stepping back and learning how to pick my spots. And, you know, screwing this up is how I learned it. And this is how, you know, coaches today, like, still learn where, you know what, like, a kid takes a bad swing or a kid has a bad game. That's okay. You know, like, sometimes you have to let them string a few bad games together before they're even ready to be coached. But, you know, leaning on some of those more experienced coaches, some of those guys who might have, you know, be very fixed in their ways, they still have the experience. Mm-hmm. So, you know, just like anything else, it's finding a balance between, you know, your knowledge and lack of experience to your job of helping players and continuing to grow. And, you know, another buzzword, everybody says that they're a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
Right. But if you are constantly changing everything that you do because you say that you're a lifelong learner, well, then you don't stand for anything. You have no staples. So, you know, I have a ton of foundational beliefs in the game and when it comes to coaching and when it comes to culture that, like, I refuse to waver on. They're like my core principles. But from those core principles, like, there are certain ways that I might tweak them as we go along, or as experience teaches me, hey, this way isn't working, or I could be better doing something else. But, you know, you have to be willing to stand for something. And, you know, just because you're constantly learning and reading everything and watching everything and you're constantly changing, that doesn't mean that you're a lifelong learner. It just means that you can't decide what you truly believe in. And
you know,
I think
I'm so thrilled you brought that up, and I didn't really think of it that way. I think that's outstanding because we, especially today, we didn't have that in the old days. In old days, we pretty much were taught, you know, we did those things. We made some few changes. Now you got so much information that you're like, your mind can blow up if you just keep changing. Love it. We're going to end it on this. A question from Frank Giannone, a good Italian. In his personal question, you manage in the minors and are now doing specific skill development with the prospects. I mean, base running, outfield, and all that. You miss managing, or is this better for you? What do you like better?
Yeah, so many people have asked me that question, and I love managing. Like, I love coaching third base. I love being in the grind with guys and the relationships that come with spending 6 months, 7 months with some guys going back to the start of spring training. So I absolutely miss managing, and, you know, at some point I may get back into managing. I don't know. But, you know, I became fascinated with culture as a manager and the culture that we were able to build within our organization, then specifically within our affiliate teams. How, you know, every year, I managed for 6 years, we had different rosters every year, but we were able to build the same type of feel amongst the group. And I think that's what culture is all about, and, you know, different staffs. So I was like, became intrigued by it. I'm like, how do you have all these different pieces of a puzzle, but at the end of each year, the picture kind of always looks the same? And that is kind of independent of, like, your won-loss record, just talking about, like, the feel and how you go about your business and all those sorts of things. And so with that fascination of culture, being able to build a similar type culture amongst our outfielders. Like, what are we going to be all about as an outfield core in this organization? Building a culture of base running, meaning, like, hey, when any team, AAA, AA, single A, and rookie ball, when, you know, the Yankees affiliate is playing against the Red Sox affiliate, they know that, man, like, those guys are going to run the bases incredibly hard, incredibly well. They're going to make good decisions. And, you know, we want to, you know, have a way about us when it comes to, hey, like, man, Red Sox base runners really really do it well. Red Sox outfielders, they're always doing the right thing, whatever the case may be. So the opportunity to build that kind of a culture for an entire organization right now is incredibly empowering. And I love this opportunity. And in the process of it, being able to spend time at every single level of the game, where I'm in the big leagues for, a handful of games every year, going AAA, AA, single A, down to rookie ball, down to our academy in the Dominican, you learn the challenges that come. You learn the challenges that come with each level. And so it allows you to cater your coaching to each level, to what that level needs. There are challenges at every level. For example, in rookie ball, one of the biggest challenges is just getting guys to the ballpark, getting them to be where the hell they're supposed to be. And then in AAA, you're dealing with guys who think they should be in the big leagues, or guys who had just gotten sent down, or guys who are at a crossroads because they're 30 years old and, they don't know what to do. So like every single level has something that is specific to that level that needs specific attention. And that's one of the really cool perspectives that you're given in the role of coordinator. So, it's not, it's not an apples to apples thing. I love both positions, and both have significant impact in very different ways.
I love all the stuff you said, and I'll tell you why, because it fits perfect if you're talking to all the coaches that we have online. When you're talking about travel teams, you might have 10 of them. Well, you're building that whole organization. Talk about a high school team, you have all different levels. So it fits everybody. And and on behalf of all our guests, all the people listening on Zoom and on Facebook and Twitter, listen, Darren, I can't thank you enough, man. I know your time's valuable, and this was outstanding.
No, you got it, Pete. And I'm glad to be able to come on. And I hope the day comes here pretty soon when we don't have the time to do all these Zooms. But, until then, I appreciate you having me, and, wish all you guys the best of luck, and stay safe. And, we'll be back on the diamond hopefully before we know it.
Absolutely. I'm a little zoomed out, so I know that. Done a lot of shows, but they're fun, and hopefully we're helping a lot of people out there. And also, I hope one day, we've never really had a chance to sit down and talk baseball. I hope we do one day. It'd be a pleasure. So again, be safe, and thank you for being on the show, man.
Yeah, you got it, Pete. Take care, man.
All right. That is Darren Fenster. Special thanks to Darren. Special thanks to our producer, the Lineup Media Group, Darren, Brian Kroc. Also, special thanks to everybody on Twitter, Facebook, and on Zoom. All our listeners, you guys are fantastic. Remember, this is the show that loves to interview baseball's greatest coaching minds who love the challenge of status quo. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. We have a special edition of our show Sunday, 1 p.m. Central, and we will have Tony Klarberg from the Swedish Baseball Academy talk international baseball. So everybody stay safe. God bless you. And like Darren said, we'll be back on the field pretty soon, hopefully. All right. See you tomorrow.